Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next panel, which is about property viewings, the past, present, and future. How we view homes has changed dramatically, but is the change here to stay? We will discuss the past, present, and future physical viewings, new virtual experiences, and renting without viewing a property. And this is going to discuss by our speakers that I want to introduce. First one is Karl Thomas. Karl is the operations director at Foxtons, one of the UK's most well-known estate agents, with a network of over 60 branches focused on Greater London. So welcome with me on stage, Karl. Okay, we move on with the intros then. The next speaker is Ed Mead. Ed is the co-founder of Viewber, a platform giving agents and landlords access to thousands of on-demand viewings and inspection assistance. And last but not least, we have James Morris-Emmanuel on board. James is the managing director for EMEA at Matterport, which is a leading virtual tour company globally. Hi, everyone.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thanks very much.
Welcome. We're still waiting for Karl. Hope he'll join us, but until he does, maybe we can kick off the conversation. I had assumed you'll join one by one, but it's all together now. So hi. Maybe until Karl joins, how do you think we start with the conversation and talk about what the past was and the present of property viewings was?
It's probably a reasonable thing for me to start because I've been around by far and away the longest. I started doing this in 1979.
Right.
And in 1979, when you wanted to look at a picture or you got a set of details of a picture, you would have been lucky to get a photo copied, if you were lucky, black and white, tiny little photograph on it. And the expectations amongst people who were wanting to go and view properties was that they were going to have to fit in with the agent's agenda. They were going to have to do, the agents controlled the stock and they controlled access to that stock. What's happened over the years is that the expectations of the people who buy and rent property has changed. They no longer want to do something when the agent tells them. They're used to an on-demand society of having things when they want them. And the issue is that, particularly on the rental side, technology has come in and significantly changed for lots of reasons. Rentals, as we know, tend to be a more passing phase for most people, certainly in the PRS. They tend to rent. Certainly from my old days at Douglas and Gordon, the average was about 19 months, but it can be a bit less. So therefore, doing things virtually or doing things without actually physically seeing them is possible. Obviously, the sales market's a bit different. No one's going to invest an average of £750,000, which is the average UK house price, just over, without going to see something. But on the rental side, it is now much more possible.
Okay, James, how do you see the past and the present of the viewings?
The present, including COVID world, or?
Well, let's start with before COVID.
So I mean, before COVID. From my perspective, from the Matterport view, virtual tours were really coming into their own, and Matterport's been in business now for a decade, and people have really started to see the value of having a virtual tour, and how that has sped up the sales process and the leasing process. So to date, a number of adopters have started using virtual technology, and I think a lot of that's been driven by consumer demand. So traditionally, I think the industry, at least in commercial, it's a B2B industry, but in residential with real estate, it is driven by the consumer, and the consumers put a lot of pressure on the agents over the last 10 years in demanding more transparency, demanding access to information, demanding the ability to view things in their time frame. So no longer during the 9 to 5, but also during the so no longer during 9 to 5 working hours. They want to be able to see properties in evenings and weekends. They want it on demand. Millennials, for example, are now the largest representation in the workforce. So they've grown up with technology. And those kinds of process and those kinds of demands are being put onto the residential and commercial agency to make it more transparent and faster. And I can talk lots about what's happening in COVID world as well, but I'll stop there.
We'll get to that. So welcome, Karl. Thanks for joining. Hi. We were talking about the past and the present of property viewings before COVID. Maybe you want to share your take as well?
Well, my take, as I was saying in our last call, is before pre-COVID, we were doing a lot more physical viewings on sites, whereas during COVID, what we have realised is the technology has played a major part in virtual viewings, and what we're finding now is applicants are doing a lot more virtual homework before they come out and view, and the viewing is more so at the moment to confirm what they've seen online, and that's why it's really important, in my opinion, to have a very good representation. Make sure your photos, description, everything matches what they're coming to see, and also your reviews online are very important as well, because that's what people are looking at the moment. We've seen during the pandemic, a lot of people have actually referred to reviews of buildings before they've actually come and decided to actually offer and take one. And I liken it to sort of a hotel setup, whereby if you think of the last holiday you booked, you would have booked a hotel based on pictures, the reviews, recommendations. You've not paid all that money for a hotel and then gone to check it before you've then reserved it. You've done it all virtually. Then it's the human side of it. When you get there, that should mirror what you've seen online, basically.
And you're muted.
I think that's absolutely fine if you're talking about the build to rent world, which is what you're referring to there, Karl, which is when you're going to rent a flat in a block of flats. That's clearly very different. I think for most people, they don't rent in blocks of flats, which are homogenous and beautifully designed, and you can go and look at reviews and all that sort of thing. So getting the information, it is interesting to hear what you say. I mean, I understand in the build to rent sector that's the truth, but at D&G, when COVID hit, there was a period for about 3 months when people couldn't go and see properties, and therefore they were beginning to put offers in to rent properties, but it was always, and almost always, it was subject to them going to have a look at it before they actually rented it. And the awful truth is that when those people went to see the properties, 8 out of 10 of them didn't take the property to rent because something was wrong. They couldn't smell, they couldn't hear, they couldn't do all the things that people normally need to know about when they live. Living is not a one sense operation. You don't live by just seeing. You don't live or make decisions by just seeing something. You want to, if you're going to go and live in it, you want to hear it, smell it, see what's going on in the vicinity. So I do think there's a real issue. And I think the problem for most people, certainly during COVID, pre-COVID, is that there's such a huge demand from not necessarily millennials, younger people. My kids are 27 now. They're perfectly happy to do things online, but they still want to physically go and see the things. And the problem for most of the people that supply the properties is that they don't have the resource to go and see, to go and do this. They don't have endless people able to go at weekends on a Sundays or whatever it is to go and look at a property. So I still think we're in a strange hinterland where the status quo is being challenged at the moment by the newcomers not newcomers, that's a completely wrong word. People have been doing videos and tours of properties for years, but I still think we're in a hinterland at the moment where people can't quite bring themselves to do things completely virtually.
Okay, so Ed, you're actually transitioning very well to the next question. James, I want to take you on that for sure. So how have the tenants and buyers changing expectations now, just aside from COVID, right? Changes due to the market and technology and what we expect have contributed to the changes how you property, and what are these trends now, James?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ed raises a great point, and I don't share the same view, but he does raise a good point. I think when it comes to sales, there's absolutely a desire to go and see the property. When it comes to buying a home, this is the most money that most people spend in their entire life. So there absolutely is a demand to go and see that property physically before making a final decision. But when it comes to rentals, we're actually seeing a lot of data to the contrary, where 90% of renters would be more interested in renting a property if it had a 3D tour the 70% of renters would lease a property sight unseen, thanks to having a 3D tour. So the data that we've found so far, especially on the rental market, it's trending towards, a little bit more like what Karl said, where in travel and hospitality, when you go to, on holiday and you rent an apartment or a hotel, you book online and you have to ensure that you have the right level of data to make that booking. I think with the data that we've seen so far for the rental market, that trend is certainly coming in for rental. We've seen time on the market for rental properties decrease over time, and by offering that transparent approach of what is available, what does the property really look like, with all of the spatial data, so the actual you're able to walk around, really judge the size, space, dimensions of the property, and really get a much better sense for the property. You are able to now do a lot more online, and we think that trend is here to stay, especially when rental property is a short 12-month lease, for example, or it's not as big a purchasing decision as sales is.
Yeah, so before we dive deep into the virtual viewings and status quo, Karl, so from the expectation sides between tenants and buyers, what do you see is currently changing?
I think I would more sort of speak from the sort of customer journey from a residential, a letting side of things. I think what I'm seeing is the expectations. People just want something to represent what they've seen online. If you go back to Ed's point about your individual landlord, there's many a time when someone's seen something online and it's not represented when they go to see the actual property, because those photos they may be using may be of a year or 2 years old before the previous tenant moved in, and going back to sort of James's point, we see it with our instructions, our hit rate is a lot higher when we have a 3D tour. People are just more liking to those. And if we're not available to do a 3D tour straight away, people want you to walk around with a video and be able to take a decent video and send it to them.
Yeah, can I just add just 1 second, please? I want to share something that someone posted in the chat. Theo Montago Andrews said, we're seeing a 90% rate of tenants, shared housing, booking a property from digital viewings. That's very interesting to read. And by the way, for the audience, please feel free to already start asking questions using the Slido tab. We'll take the questions towards the end of the session. Please go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, no, it was interesting to hear. It's interesting to hear that bit of chat there, really, because when James was saying sort of 70% would lease a property, the question is, are they leasing a property? And shared housing is slightly different from the normal. There's a different demand spread with shared housing. Often people who are looking at shared housing are looking at a different dynamic. It's not quite the same as the PRS or build to rent, but nevertheless it's still representative of the fact that these things are this is changing. What I was going to add to what Karl was just saying was that actually from our perspective with what we do at Viewber, we've had to transition not just from doing personal viewings. We now do virtual tours, we do WhatsApp tours with so a Viewber will turn up and you can have up to 6 people on a call walking around showing the property live, which is almost one better, I think, because you can then say, well, actually, what's right behind that door? What is the view out of the window? Or can you hear anything? Or whatever it is. So the virtual, you can have a sort of hybrid here, but I'm absolutely convinced that if you want to attract someone to come and look at your property, you're better off putting a 3D tour on it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, James, we're already diving fully deep into the current status quo of virtual viewings, and the question is will we go back after the pandemic to a pre-pandemic status quo?
No, I don't think we're going to go back. I think one thing that pandemic has forced upon operators, whether it's an agent or an owner or a vendor, is really looking at their operations as a business, and a little bit like how recession works, cost cutting, time efficiency, human resource efficiency, and the pandemic I think has forced that upon the industry, and everybody the majority have addressed it, have made pivots. As Ed and Karl have both advised, virtual walkthroughs, digital twins, 3D models were a very big go-to, and I think that trend is here to stay. And with the consumer demand compounded on top of that, people want more efficiency and more speed, and the data is in. A lot of these companies have pivoted, and Ed just mentioned it. It starts with a digital twin, and then it might move on to a virtual viewing. It's very, very unlikely that we're going to regress back from this position. There's also, obviously the other piece that we haven't touched on, which is high on a lot of people's agenda, is net zero emissions and sustainability. An agent and a purchaser all driving to a property numerous times to view something is not efficient and not economically, not environmentally friendly. So by being more efficient, it actually helps a lot of companies also drive towards their net zero emission targets and sustainability targets. So I don't see us going back from today, and I think the future actually starts to look even more interesting as you're able to add richer, more detailed information on top of these models. Ed spoke about you can't smell it, you can't hear it. Okay, there's no reason why we can't add sound into a model. So you're walking around a property and you click a little play button. This is the ambient sound recording from your window. All of this is to come in the future, and I think we're on this path now, and the only way is forward.
Yeah, James, maybe before we go forward with our questions, there was a question in Slido addressed to you directly. James, can you please share the source of your data about willingness to rent sight unseen?
I can. Might have to do that afterwards, but let me see if I can quickly see it in the background, and I can come back in the Slido.
All right, sure. I think, Ed, you want to say something? And you're muted. Ed, you're muted.
I'm doing the right thing by muting, sorry, just because there are people walking about and things here. So apologies. Ambient noise, it just means an old guffer like me it messes it up occasionally. Yeah, I think the point I was going to, two things. In terms of the green thing, that's part of what we've done. The whole point of, I quite agree, having agents driving miles to show things is just ridiculous. That's partly why Viewber exists, is to have a local person who's qualified to go and open the doors. They go around the corner and open the door up. We've got 7,000 of these people all over the UK. So that's definitely a big point. And like it or lump it, if you're slightly older like me, you tend to look at, when people mention carbon neutral and all that sort of stuff, you tend to sort of glaze over a little bit. But it is incredibly important these days, particularly for the renting generation who are younger. It's very, very important. So I understand that. But I think looking at properties has become part of, pre-COVID, your weekend activities. I know that sounds terrible, but people in the UK are obsessed with property. They like going to look at properties. We spoke in our brief chat we had a couple of weeks ago about the fact that Rightmove have, whatever it is, 20, 30, 40 million hits a month on their properties, yet there are only 100,000 transactions for sales, not an awful lot more, or probably less for rentals. That's an enormous amount of browsing that's going on. And like it or lump it, the British psyche enjoys getting out and physically going around and seeing properties. And I think one can accommodate that. I don't think we're going completely into this virtual world where people do everything based on what they see on a 3D tour. As I say, to me, it's part of the marketing. I still come back to James's comment earlier on when he said 70% of people would lease. The fact of the matter is, do they lease? That's the difference.
Yeah, but to add to that, yeah, 70% of people definitely do. And looking at the stats that we've got from our systems, I can confirm that is probably a bit more based on what we've done in the last sort of 9 months during the pandemic. What I'm noticing as well, just to give you a bit of context on that, Ed, is if you look at our negotiators' diaries, a lot of that is mixture of virtual viewings. People are still wanting to do virtual tours, and there's probably less people now specifically wanting to say, right, no, I really want to view that property like now. We find that at the moment we're doing a lot more virtual tours. And just to go back to your point on the Rightmove stats, I think what we need to look at as well is, just to put that in context as well, is those hits, you've got one person looking at several properties. So that's those hits would be in relation to that as well. But I think going forward, when you look at how the property is presented, we also have to take in consideration the amount of time people are spending browsing around different properties, and also the times that people are looking at properties, as opposed to the times when people can physically go and see. So I was reading something not too long ago where it was saying that for internet traffic, Sunday evenings has the highest rates of traffic for certain property portals. So what you're seeing there is not many people would be able to go and physically view properties on a Sunday evening. And going forward, what we are seeing, and going back to what we're saying about, the last 9 months, the stats are in to say that, we have had a high number of people reserve properties virtually, do all their paperwork virtually. With Home Office have, said we can do right to rent checks virtually as well. So there are a lot of instances where, someone's not meeting someone until they physically go and get the keys. And that goes back to my point of the hotel situation. And I don't really see that changing. If anything, I just see it becoming more of a seamless approach to renting going forward.
Thank you, Karl. Let's move on to the next question. There are a few questions from the audience that I want to take, but there's one question that I would like to address, you especially, Karl and James. How do you create parity between virtual and physical viewings? How can they become?
So go on, Cam.
No, how can they be perceived as like equal in quality for someone?
I think first and foremost, you're looking at the reviews, and I just think it's just honesty. I mean, you look at listings, and agents for a long time have had a stigma where the one thing they see online is different to what they go and see in a property. But I think how you can create that is just what you see online is what you get. You're liking it again. If you ordered something from Uber Eats, okay, there's a slim chance it might not look like the glossy pictures, but from a property point of view, there's no reason why what you've seen online should not represent what you're going to see physically.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Karl. Authenticity and transparency are definitely two of the key drivers, and going forward, I think the agents who offer those to the consumer in the most credible fashion, both with hard data and soft data, are the ones that will come out on top. In terms of parity, it depends what level of parity you want to get to. I mean, the one thing about technology is, this is a Bill Gates statement, is we overestimate the change that will happen in 10 years and we underestimate the change that will happen in 2. And as the industry is driving forward so quickly, there are more things that you're going to be able to do online. So with the digital twin, are you going to be able to do co-viewings where you just log on and someone shows you around and they talk you through the property? Are you going to be able to have rich data where you add furniture inside the property as well with virtual staging? Are you going to be able to click a button and hear sound for what that property is like? I think, with the digital twin technology, we're still at the beginning of this journey, and then there's a long way to go until we get to a place of parity. And it depends on what particular sector we're in. So rental, I think we're pretty close to getting parity already, and we'll be there very soon. With purchasing properties, I think we'll get very, very close, but I can see a world where people do everything online. But at the moment, like I said before, it's the biggest amount of money that anyone's ever spent. There's a high chance that they're still going to want to physically see it. But I think a huge amount of the current process can be taken online. And essentially, the property industry is a very analog industry in general. The whole industry's got to become more digital, and we're all sitting here today as leaders in our fields, helping that transition, and that transition is only going to continue, and that will bring parity.
The problem you've got on the sales side, James, is that most people who run the agencies, the estate agencies that would change, and this is not being rude to them at all, but they're guys like me. They're middle-aged men who've run their systems in the same way for donkey's years. They produce a good income. They don't necessarily make huge profits. And so the idea that they're going to suddenly change their entire methodology is terrifying to them. It's a really difficult thing to change that status quo for a lot of people. Renting is a younger industry, and a lot of the people that run those businesses can often be younger, and they're much more, the fact that there can be so much consolidation in that industry, and we've seen people buying people to do this. Karl's lot have just bought my lot, you know, that's what happens. And it's because of the rental portfolios. You can manage a lot more properties because of the services and the way people run things. But I do think that there's an issue here. I mean, again, I think Karl's comments about reviews and all this stuff, that applies to the, let's just remember that the build to rent sector is still only about 170,000, 180,000 units. There are 2.5 million in the private rented sector. That is a very different ball game. You know, if you're going to see one of those properties, if the pictures were taken a year ago, you know, there's so much stuff that's difficult. I'm absolutely convinced that even on the rental side, parity will still involve some kind of human presence at the property, even if it is holding a camera, walking around with it, whatever it is. So that is still going to be some kind of a hybrid. I simply don't see. And I think, again, it's very easy. We forget we've been in this COVID environment now for over a year. And I think a lot of people have forgotten what normal life is like. People like getting out and about. Just because they're suddenly used to getting stuck behind a flipping screen looking at something doesn't mean they're always going to want to do that. I don't think they will.
But Ed, I mean, to draw some analogies, look at the film industry. You know, Blockbuster's been around for ages, and Netflix just came in and just wiped them out. This was someone from outside, someone from within the industry. They were, you know, sending DVDs backwards and forwards through the post. All of a sudden, pivoted and just wiped out the whole industry. And you know, the film industry has learned a big lesson from, you know, how that transition to online's gone. The same with the music industry.
Yeah, and very different thing between entertainment and getting a roof over your head. I just people often provide all those sort of. I get it. I absolutely get it, but I just think it's a very different thing when you're talking about the roof over your head.
What I would add to that, Ed, is there will always be a need for human interaction when it comes to, in my opinion, any transaction. But I think the use of technology there's a lot more use of technology before someone makes that decision. Even when they then come and view the property physically, they're then back reliant on technology, doing even more research on certain areas. So I don't ever think, you know, we'll have potentially robots replacing us, for example, but we are in a situation and we're seeing it, you know, even at Foxtons, we are seeing a lot of people were using the virtual side of things before making that decision, even after viewing. So it's just to bear that in mind, really. You know, it's not going to change as in humans not doing the part of the transaction, but us as humans, if we look at other areas we're using technology for, before the pandemic, we probably wasn't using it as much for the things we're using it for now. And I just think going forward, we're going to see a lot of change. The technology will actually just get better, you know, and the technology we've got at the moment is quite simple and basic, but it's going to get better and be able to do a lot more with it from a rental point of view.
So it sounds to me, Karl, from what you're saying, it paints this picture of like this augmentation of the viewing, saying that, you know, the physical viewing might not be fully obsolete, but potential tenants might spend more time engaging in the virtual viewing and looking into properties. So like we're increasing the pie in a way of time spent to assess what I want to look at and what not.
Yeah, and again, just going back to Ed's point, you know, as I say, we're in COVID, and you go back to the point of doing a WhatsApp call with 6 viewings. Before you would have an open house and you would get them in the property pretty much at the same time. Whereas you can, again, our negotiators are able to be a lot more efficient by this virtual way of working, you know. But again, we still need negotiators to do the job. But as I say, the technology is aiding the job to become easier.
Okay, so we have like a few questions on Slido, and if you don't mind, I would like to take them on. So there's one question. Each of the panelists are focusing on the wish by renters to see a property, but isn't it also that the landlord or agent insists on meeting the tenants before?
At the moment, you don't, from a right to rent point of view, that's the only reason you need to really meet them physically. But at the moment, that is still, you can still do right to rent checks via your phone virtually as well. And as I say, I think you'll get to a stage where you probably meet them on the viewing they might want to measure something, and then you'll meet them to hand over keys, do a full run through of the property. I think that's where we're going, and I think that applies to the build to rent world and the individual landlord world as well.
Yeah, I think that speaks also to a lot of the other technology that's currently involved in terms, which I'm sure Karl uses a whole range of, from tenant referencing and all this sort of thing. I mean, in the old days, people rented just to get a feel for the tenant. I completely understand that people want to see the person that's going to be living in their property. These days, a lot of that can be done offline and well, not online, if you see what I mean, without the need to meet. It's very different in the sales sector. There's still a percentage of people in the sales sector that want to go and meet the buyer because they want to sell them a load of services. That's a whole different ball game. But on the renting side, I can see that there's much less of an appetite for that.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, we touched on it a little bit before about what's the future of agency, and I think a lot of it is added value services that are already in place. A lot of companies are already selling mortgage facilities and moving facilities as well. So, moving forward, the agent absolutely has a role. And there's definitely a balance between physical and digital, but what are those added value services? And that's exactly what we're talking about now. Do you need to physically meet a renter anymore? Not really. You do the credit checks, you do reference checking, you've got all of that available. So that need has kind of been removed somewhat. Yeah,
James, I want to follow up on this because there's a question aligned to what you said, which is, will agency staff need to transition from viewers, door openers, into professional property stagers to help prepare a property for digital shooting?
I'm not sure I'm best placed to answer that question. I mean, from my quick view is just less about will the agent's role move towards a property stager, but will the agent's role transition into something which has more added value service to it? And I mean, I think Karl's probably in the best place to answer, how the agent's role is developing over the coming years. But I don't see them going straight to I'm virtually staging a property. I think there's definitely more added value services to do with helping people through that buying and renting process.
Okay, Karl, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you again, in my opinion, you're always going to need a human, so you always will need an agent to help you through a process. There's nothing better than someone that's been working in a particular area for 5, 10, 15 years to give you, you can go to this restaurant. You can see all this online, but again, that human interaction, that human feedback, those verbal reviews are really good. So we're here to stay. We're not going anywhere. But as I say, and again, I know I sound like a broken record to a degree, the technology is just getting better and helping us, aid us do our jobs more efficiently. At the moment, for example, if I needed to, we're able to send 5, 6 virtual videos to several applicants, but at the same time, there's going to be a need for someone. Technology cannot close the deal. You still need that human being to have that conversation, receive the offer, present the offer, and get the process. So it's here to stay, but it's here to aid, and it will get better. But I think as agents, we just need to be looking at upskilling ourselves with the use of technology and seeing how the technology that we're using can embed into the systems that we've already got in place. And there's a lot of prop tech at the moment for all mannerisms of things, but it's a case of using a human being, and especially with certain large transactions, you don't just want to apply for a computer. I mean, you look at the mortgages, for example, there are companies online where, you can go and apply for your mortgage, but you ask most of the people, and looking at Alexander Hall, for example, people still want to deal with a mortgage broker.
Karl, sorry to interrupt you. We're almost out of time. With one more minute, I would like to take one question and get a quick answer from all of you to that question. I think it's an important one. How do you promote people to leave good reviews, as most people only leave a review if they have a bad experience?
Well, the simple answer to that is to ask them, obviously. But I never do anything but just by reviews. I got to be honest. I think that day's come and gone. I think there's so much gaming of reviews these days that I think I don't think many people, or I don't think everybody trusts all reviews.
So I mean, for me, reviews are vital. You know, Amazon released a case study saying that their soft data, meaning their reviews about the product by other purchasers, is more important than the hard data, which is like, here's a photo and here's the dimensions of the property. So Amazon have said their soft data is the most important part of a property listing page. So I think the reviews are something that we need to develop, and I think will also help create, you know, this world where we can rent properties more efficiently based on some soft data as well. You know, people who lived there before over many years, and we definitely need to encourage more reviews in general.
Karl, how do we encourage more positive reviews?
As Ed said, literally ask for it, provide the service, and really encourage the reviews. I mean, in the hospitality sector, you know, it's all about reviews. You're not going to a restaurant with bad reviews. You're not staying at a hotel with bad reviews. You know, you're not gonna rent a car from a company with bad reviews. It is all reviews, and I think the review starts from the minute that person starts transacting, whether it's transacting with you as an individual or transacting with your technology. Because if your technology is not up to par, one, they may not leave a review. And I think sometimes we have to look at the review side of things as a bad review is still very important in my point of view if you're looking to improve, you know, because on some platforms they allow you to reply to a review, and you know, some people may leave a bad review in the heat of the moment. So I think definitely it's just to ask for reviews, good, bad or ugly, because
sorry to cut you off, but we're out of time. Ultimately, it's all about service and providing value to the customer. That's a good closing sentiment here. Thank you all very much for joining. A very interesting session. It was a pleasure to moderate it. And our next session for the audience will be refurbishing properties, a vanity investment, or a way to drive up yield. See you all back at 10:50. Thank you very much for joining, and have a wonderful day.